Hello, my name is Jeffrey Herbst. I am president of American Jewish University in Los Angeles, and welcome to another program sponsored by the Wizen Center for Open Learning. I'm delighted today that we're presenting a program titled Syria and Lebanon, Threats and Opportunities with our good friends from the American Friends of the Israel Intelligence, Heritage, and Commemoration Center. Over the last few months, developments across the Middle East, but especially in Israel's northern borders and with Lebanon and Syria, have drawn the world's attention. And despite the fact that it seems that every hill is examined closely by intelligence agencies across the country, there have been numerous surprises, including Israel's decapitation of Hezbollah and regime change in Syria. Today, I'm delighted that we have four experts who will be talking about what the developments in Syria and Lebanon mean. In addition, because we cannot ignore very current events, we'll also be talking about President Trump's recent announcements, predictions about Gaza. I'm joined today by four friends of American Jewish University. Yigal Zadenstein is the president and founder of American Friends of the Israel Intelligence, Heritage, and Commemoration Center, an organization that preserves and promotes the rich heritage of Israel's intelligence history. Brigadier General Yosef Kuperwasser is the head of the Institute for the Research of Intelligence Methodology at the Israel Intelligence, Heritage, and Commemoration Center. General Kuperwasser was formerly the Director General of the Ministry of International Affairs and Strategy and joins us from Israel. Harley Lipman is the CEO and founder of Genesis 10, an IT consulting and staffing firm. He's a frequent commentator on Middle East politics for a variety of publications and has developed strong ties with the region's leaders. And finally, General Aharon Farkash is an expert in the field of security, military intelligence. During the general service in the IDF, he was prominent in strategic planning, direction of projects, and management and leading large military units, and also joins us from Israel. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Yigal, maybe you could tell the audience briefly about the American Friends Center.
Thank you. Good evening, good afternoon, good night, everyone. My name is Yigal Zadenstein. I'm the founder and the president of the American Friends of the Israel Intelligence, Heritage, and Commemoration Center. That one of the goals of the organization is to educate about the heritage, the history of the Mossad, the Shin Bet, and the military intelligence unit of the IDF. So, for example, we're establishing now different exhibitions about the Israeli intelligence communities, the Mossad, the Shin Bet, and the military intelligence. We also support the orphans and the widows of the Israeli intelligence community. And we have two research centers. The first research center, the Meir Amit Research Center, to fight anti-Semitism and the BDS by providing the most accurate information about the situation in the Middle East that we receive it often from the Israeli intelligence, and the research center for the methodology of intelligence that develop different intelligence methodologies to help the Israeli intelligence and to bring the intelligence to the academy in Israel. And we, in the American Friends, want to bring you to know more about the Israeli intelligence, that I think it's a big part of the Jewish history. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for.
Thank you very much. Why don't we dive right into it? General Kuperwasser, maybe you could set the scene for us as to what is the current situation and recent developments in Lebanon and Syria, given all the changes I noted.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'll start by a few words about the general picture, the overview, and then go to Syria and Lebanon. First of all, because what happened in Syria and Lebanon is a part of the overall view, and secondly, because with everything that happened in the last few days, it's a little bit odd to go directly to Syria and Lebanon. So to begin with, I would say that 16 months after the horrible barbaric attack of 7th of October 2023, it's quite clear that Israel has turned the table and managed to cause severe damage to the Iranian-led axis of evil and terror, to the point that we are able to really look at this point of time as most best fit, I would say, for an attempt to shape the Middle East the way Israel and the United States want to see it shaped. And what we have seen yesterday was an attempt by President Trump to share his vision for the Middle East in the three elements that comprise, in his view, the most important elements of the picture. First, I would like to say that before I explain what he said, he also referred to the question of whether Iran is still strong or weak. The fact is that Israel still faces some very difficult challenges. That's why we need to shape the Middle East in a different way. There are two kinds of challenges that Israel faces. First, and the most pressing one, is the need to release the hostages from Gaza, to release all the hostages. We are in the process of releasing them according to a deal, and we want to make sure that all of them are released. That's number one on the Israeli list, and also I think on President Trump's list. Secondly, we have to deal with the threats that are still there. Iran is still a very big threat, even though it has been diminished as a threat throughout the war. Hamas is still a threat. Hezbollah is still a threat. The Houthis are still a threat. The Palestinian terrorists in Judea and Samaria are still a threat. We are facing a lot of threats also on the international arena from the ICC and the other elements that want to delegitimize Israel. This is not a minor issue. We have to deal with all those threats simultaneously. We were talking about 7 fronts, actually 8 fronts that we were fighting at the same time. And we are still fighting on all of them, even though in some of them there is some sort of a ceasefire. But it's only a ceasefire. It's not necessarily the end of the war. So this has to be kept in mind when we look at the challenges that Israel faces. But in order to deal with those challenges, the first thing that the president has put on the table was the vision for the Palestinian issue, especially for Gaza. And what he has in mind, as was presented yesterday, is the United States taking ownership of the Gaza Strip, evacuating the population from there to enable the rebuilding and the reconstruction of Gaza, turning it into a prosperous Riviera that everybody can enjoy, and providing positions for many workers that would be involved in this effort. Of course, it's clear that for making it happen, there are a lot of obstacles that have to be overcome. First of all, Hamas is not volunteering to allow this to happen. And since nobody has in mind forcing the population out, there's no way to bring them out as long as Hamas is in power. So first of all, Hamas has to be removed from power. And this goes along with what Israel describes as the ultimate and complete victory. So this first has to happen after releasing the hostages. Secondly, you have to make sure that somebody is ready to accept the evacuees. And we all know that the Arab states that were mentioned as potential location to which the evacuees will be sent or go, refused to accept them. It was clear that Egypt and Jordan, first and foremost, are against it. And nobody else has given any hint that they are ready to do that. So the president has a very difficult job in front of him, convincing the Jordanians, the Egyptians, and others to accept the people of Gaza on the way out. He is about to meet the leaders in the coming weeks, and we'll see whether he's going to be successful in convincing them. He's very proud of his ability to succeed in doing that with other leaders. Who knows, maybe he's going to surprise everybody with this. I would say it's not out of the box. It's far from the box view that he has about how the Gaza problem should be solved.
Maybe we could expand the conversation to participants. Harley, you've been traveling in the region, speaking to many people in the region. How do you sum up Israel's position after recent developments in Syria and Lebanon and given President Trump's announcement?
Well, here's what I would say about what's taking place is clearly it's a time for optimism and encouragement from the Israeli side. Israel, as we know, has scored enormous victories by having Assad having been overthrown from power. It's a big setback for Iran. We understand it brings, and that's a later topic, it brings dangers in terms of Turkish influence and Al-Qaeda related groups. But things, to your question, things are a lot better for Israel. That's when I worry, because I think of what Israel's going to be like 10, 20, 50 years from now. And I remember after 67, this huge feeling of confidence. Israeli jets were, before June 67, 35 minutes flying time to Cairo. After the 67 war, there were 3 to 5 minutes flying time to Cairo. We all know Israel expanded its borders, were closer to the Arab world with buffers and everything else. And then yet what happened? Israel was caught off guard, surprised. The Arab world was united, attacked Israel, Syria, and Egypt. Israel was caught off guard and had horrific, terrible casualties at the time, and almost lost that war, or may have lost that war. And why was that? Because Israel was arrogant, because they thought they were the biggest, strongest country around and no one could affect them. That's what I worry about, that because today Israel has had all these victories lately to the credit of the IDF, to the credit of the Israeli intelligence services. They've been nothing but remarkable and heroic. But the question is, now that they have the enemy weak, you don't walk away. You have a unique and historic opportunity to destroy your enemy, to remake the Middle East in a way that makes peace for everybody. You know, what's remarkable about Trump's talk about Gaza is he cares about the Gazans. He says these Palestinians lived terrible life before. Nothing's worked for 70 years. And to all of Trump's critics, I'd say Trump should turn it around and say, give me your plan. You have a better plan? Nobody has come up with a better plan in 70 years. Nothing has worked. And that's the brilliance of Trump. Whatever you want to say about him, he recognizes that, if you keep on trying to do the same thing and it's not working, that's a definition of idiocy. So he's trying to do something completely out of the box. And I think that given how Gaza is now, I don't see how it's possible to rebuild it with the people there. There's no sewage, there's no electricity, there's no water. I don't know if there are even any hospitals functioning. So the people need to be moved somewhere else. And I think the plan is you could move them elsewhere and say they could come back. But if someone's going to be a cab driver in Cairo and likes it, no, the Marines are not going to come in and forcibly move him back to Gaza. He would stay in Cairo. The reason why the Arab world is against it is, let's take Egypt. If a huge number of Palestinians go into Egypt and they undercut the wages of Egyptians because they'll take labor at much cheaper wages than Egyptians will, you're going to make Egyptians very, very angry. And they're going to see that they're going to lose their jobs because Palestinians will take the same job at a lower salary. That's what the Egyptians and the Jordanians are worried about. But I think there's no easy solution. Nothing's perfect. But where you have strong leadership and he has a lot of power at his disposal, I hope that we do something like this, because this creates a better future for everybody, starting with the Palestinians. Safety for Israel. It brings back U.S. leadership to the region. I will say one thing that I want to say, comment on Yossi's analysis, which I think is excellent, except for one thing. I would be very surprised if the United States took ownership of Gaza. That I don't see happening. What I do see is the United States supporting the wealthier Arab nations that are allies like Saudi Arabia and the UAE to take ownership of Gaza. And probably Trump would want the Palestinian Authority to manage it, because you need some Arab entity, which is very problematic. We all know that. They want to destroy Israel through diplomatic, public relations, and other means, where Hamas wants to destroy Israel through violence and war. So both are really enemies of Israel in certain ways. But I think that's a really more, in my opinion, more accurate reflection of the way Trump and his team envision this unfolding.
I should note that after some comments and discussion, I'll take questions from the audience. Please start submitting your questions via the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. General Farkash, appreciate your observations on the situation at the moment, Syria and Lebanon, and as we all are also focusing on Gaza.
Thank you to having us. I am happy to be a part of this webinar. I have to say that we need a lot of courage to try to assess the situation in Syria, in Lebanon, in Gaza, and even in Iran, especially in the last year. Syria have a new president, Julani. His name is coming from the Golan Heights, Ahmed al-Shara, and he is a Muslim. He's not, it's a Sunni Muslim. It's not a Shia Muslim, it's an Alawi, as were the leaders in Syria from the 60s, from the 70s, President Assad, the father and the son. So it's a new completely Syria without the big and the strong support of Iran. We see also the Russians, because they are involved in Ukraine. They don't try to rebuild the power in Syria. So Syria became very weak, and they concentrate with the policy in the internal regime to see how to rebuild Syria as maybe a new country, a new state. The same happened in Lebanon. Israel, from the last 6 months, we demonstrated how we can solve the immediate problem, and I point out the immediate problem with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Even though the IDF is deployed along the Lebanon-Israeli border, we believe that Hezbollah is very weak, and it's very difficult for Hezbollah to rebuild the power, and this is a good chance for the new president in Lebanon to build a state with one weapon, with one law, and without giving the power for Hezbollah. So watching the global situation, to make it shortly, I see that our next challenge in the region is to deal, of course, with the other challenge, Judea and Samaria, that the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria are aware about the global situation, and we can see that the IDF is working, is fighting very, very tough in Jenin and in Tulkarem to make it sure that Judea and Samaria will be quiet, and we will be prepared maybe for strategic decision, watching the new revolution in the Middle East based on President Trump's vision that we listened to it last night. So I believe the challenge is still not to give Hezbollah to be rebuilt, the military force, to make sure that the new president, Ahmed al-Shara Julani in Syria, will be concentrated to strengthen his leadership in Syria, to go together with the United States to solve the problem in Gaza. It's a huge problem. I cannot see the situation that 2 million, suddenly we are talking about 1.7 million citizens in Gaza. I know the number that it was approximately 2.2 million. Suddenly they are 1.7. You can see in the media talking about 1.7. So I believe this is a huge challenge to see what can be done. The Middle East is different than Europe. It's different than UK. So I believe we have to understand also the roots in the Middle East, the power of Islam in the Middle East, the Arab countries that have the feeling that they have to give a backup to the Palestinians. And finally, of course, Iran. I believe that based on President Trump's vision, we have to give US the chance to prevent Iran to achieve a military nuclear possibility. So I believe this reduces the chance that maybe, or the opportunity that Israel thought can be military solve the problem to prevent Iran not to achieve a military nuclear bomb. So I believe this is the picture, and I believe it's impossible to talk about strategy without being aware about the day-to-day challenges, that the applications are not tactical, are strategic applications for our life, for the Jewish state future in the Middle East.
General, thanks so much. Why don't we go around the region a little bit? You talked about Lebanon, which of course, President Aoun, first president of Lebanon in more than 3 years. I'd like to ask the other panelists, are you relatively optimistic that Aoun, who comes from the one Lebanese institution that's respected, the army, but at the same time, it was an army that cooperated with Hezbollah for many years and penetrated by Hezbollah. Are you relatively optimistic that the new Lebanese president will be able to exert control and critically keep Hezbollah north of the Litani River as per the ceasefire accord?
Well, let's put it this way. He has the best chance that any president of Lebanon had in the last 30 years. So it's how well he's going to use this opportunity, it's too early to say, but and he's trying a little bit. But it's not easy because Hezbollah is still a force to reckon with in Lebanon, and still has strides inside the military. We just were told about intelligence officers in the military that take information that is provided to the Americans and share it with Hezbollah. And this has been the case in Lebanon for years. So it's not going to be easy for him. But still, this is the best chance. Hezbollah is weaker than ever, as General Farkash said, and I think everybody knows it's going to be very difficult for Hezbollah to regroup and rearm because of what happened in Syria. And the fact that they had to accept Joseph Aoun as president reflects their understanding of how weak they are. And they lack the most important element in their force, which is Hassan Nasrallah himself, the leader. Without him, it's not the same. It's a pale version of Hezbollah. So, and they lost, of course, a lot of their infrastructure and the weaponry and everything they prepared along the border with Israel to enable them to launch an attack against Israel, in a surprise attack. All of that is gone, and he's going to use it. We see that, nevertheless, the deployment of the Lebanese army in the south, according to the agreement, the ceasefire agreement, has been slower than expected, or slower than needed to be according to the agreement. And that's why we have decided to ask the Americans, and this was agreed upon, that we shall postpone the end of the ceasefire period before we withdraw from Lebanon to February 18th instead of January 26th. And but the army, the Lebanese army, has accepted it because they understand they need more time. They need to gain more confidence. One other thing that is important to understand in this respect in Lebanon is that unlike what happened before October 7th or 8th, 2023, from now on, the responsibility to make sure that Hezbollah is doing what they need to do and don't redeploy in the area is on Israel. Yes, the Lebanese army has a role and has to do all kinds of things if they can, and they are expected to do them. But if they don't do what they are expected, we don't go to UNIFIL, which is something that we cannot rely upon at all, but we go to ourselves. And if we indicate that there is a problem, we take care of it ourselves. And we have carried out several attacks during the last couple of weeks against all kinds of things that we didn't like when we saw that Hezbollah was trying to regroup. That's a big difference, and this is going to help Aoun in his efforts to perform his mission.
Harley, are you optimistic relative in the Lebanese context, an understanding of optimism about current developments?
Well, I think this is an extraordinary opportunity that has so many things for us to be excited and encouraged about, but so many dangers to it. So why should we be excited? As Yossi Kupawasa said, our enemies now are very, very weak, which is great. But what happens a year from now, 5 years, 10 years from now? We need to have a strategy, because for the first time, Israel is in what is arguably its healthiest and most secure position it's ever been in since its founding in terms of its physical security, given the fact that Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, and Hamas are so weak now. That said, Israel needs to take advantage of it. What I worry about is the dangers that you can only address through psychology. And what happened in 1973? What happened on October 7th? Israel violated 3 basic rules of warfare. And that's what you have to focus on if you ever have any chance of resolving this, where Israel could finally live in peace with its neighbors. And the 3 rules of warfare is: 1, never underestimate your enemy. 2nd is never hold them in contempt. And 3rd, never think they can recover from disaster. So while our enemies are weak, they play the long game. Iranians are very smart. They're the people who invented chess. They will come back. They will come back. They'll do lessons learned. They'll be creative. They're smart. They'll come back in a different way. And they will come back to destroy Israel. Nothing has changed in their beliefs. And if you go back, let's just think of this. If we went back 2 years ago and I said to everyone, hey, guess what? Israel's going to be attacked on October 7th, and they're going to lose militarily decisively to Hamas in the beginning. And hundreds of Israelis, thousands, are going to be raped, murdered, slaughtered. And they're going to take hundreds of hostages back to Israel. And Iran's going to attack Israel, not once, but twice, firing ballistic missiles into Israel. No one would have ever believed me, right? Nobody. And yet all those things happened. And so I'm telling you now, Iran will use a nuclear bomb, will develop one. Let me do it in reverse order. Will develop one and will use it against Israel. I will bet on it. I will bet $1 million of my own money, and they will do it. Because we go into wishful thinking. History, if it should teach us anything, it's that when our adversaries and enemies say they're going to do bad things to us, believe them. They mean it. They do it. Even Sadat, the peacemaker, kept on saying, I'm going to take back the Sinai. I'm going to take back the Sinai militarily. And Israeli said, oh, bravado. He's having all these training exercises. Well, one day he turned that training exercise into a military assault on Israel with devastating consequences. Only by luck, brilliance, the grace of God, Sharon surrounded the Egyptian Third Army. Israel could have lost the 73 war. When Syria attacked in the Golan Heights, they almost cut Israel in 2. Even if Israel would have ultimately prevailed, at what price? How many Israeli Jewish soldiers would have been killed in doing it? So I'm just saying history is what we must look at. You have to look at this not here and today, but in the context of history. You have enemies that want to destroy you. And the best example is recently is Hamas. What were we doing when for years and years they're building tunnels, spending billions of dollars, building the most sophisticated tunnels in the world, bigger than the London subway system, bigger than the New York subway system? We were asleep. We didn't do anything to stop it. So what I'm saying is now we're going to get excited by how weak the Arab enemies are, how strong we are. We're going to get comfortable. There's a weariness about the war. We will have gotten back most, if not all, our hostages. We're going to go to sleep again. That's the biggest danger. And unless we recognize that, and that takes leadership, whoever is in leadership, Bibi Netanyahu, Benny Gantz, Lieberman, whoever it is, they need to rally the people like Winston Churchill and say, we're in this for the long haul. For the first time, we see light at the end of the tunnel. For the first time, we have a chance. with normalization with Saudi Arabia, which we're not talking about, which I think will be done. And I think what Trump and Bibi Netanyahu talked about was this. I think Trump said to Bibi, we got to figure a way of some steps towards a Palestinian nation so we could get normalization with Saudi Arabia. Bibi's going to go, how are we going to do that? And Trump is going to say, you need to manage your coalition. So maybe you got to get rid of.
Why don't we get on to some of these other issues? So let me ask the group, moving on to Israel's other neighbors. There have been changes in Syria. There's a president, nominal president, but there's also a lot of discontent and a lot of armed groups in the country and a lot of people still interfering from Turkey, Iran, and the like. Would you bet, I'll put it to the two generals, that the current leadership in Syria is relatively stable, or do you think that they'll face their own challenges to further rule?
It's very difficult, and to be a prophet in these times is very difficult. I believe that Giuliani is making a few important steps to build his leadership into Syria in strong relationship with Turkey. Turkey was involved in this changing regime in Syria, and I believe they will assist Giuliani, and he is going to I believe to visit Saudi Arabia, in Iran, in other during his next month. So we can see that he is a guy that, first of all, understands that his strong position must be built in Syria, an internal policy and not external policy. And I believe this is a situation that it's important to be dealt with, because the bad relationship that lately we have with Erdogan and with Turkey. So I believe this new situation in the Middle East must be understood with the new development, the position of Erdogan, the weakness of Russia that is not going to be in Syria, the relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia that are going to be closer and closer. So the Arab world understand finally that they must find a solution from the region and not always be in connection and be dependent to the superpowers. So I believe we must be careful to try to predict what is going to happen in the Middle East, and what is very important, to decide what are our changes in Israel, how big the investment that we have to do with the army to make it strong and to prevent a surprise as happened in October 23. And if we cannot prevent and we will be surprised against, then we have to have a strong army prepared every morning to prevent such an event as happened in October 23. So I believe, first of all, we have to decide what to do to try to coordinate better and better our relationship and our policy with the US, and to understand the power of a few European countries in the Middle East. France, that is very strong in Lebanon, UK, in other Russia. I believe this is a challenge that must assist Israel to define the policy in this last development that we are facing in the Middle East.
General Kuperwasser, your view of likely developments in Syria, as hard as that is to say?
Well, of course, I agree with General Farkas. That's very difficult because it's only 2 months that Shara is in power in Syria. It's too early to say. But if you look at Shara's history, he was always the most moderate element within the radicals. And he was always pushing towards moderation. That's why he cut his relations with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi at the time, and later on with Ayman al-Zawahiri. He was always too moderate for them. And he always put the issue of Syria first and Islam second. And this moderation and wise attitude that he adopted allowed him always to show leadership. And wherever he came, immediately he became the leader, and he managed to overcome all kinds of tensions with other groups in his vicinity and remain the leader. He's a very young person. He's 42 years old. And nevertheless, he has managed to do that all the time. So I think that he is a wise guy, and he knows how to play with the external forces and internal forces, and he has a good chance to stay in power. And I think that we should give him a chance. We should give him a chance because in the situation that prevails right now in Syria, his main concern is stabilizing the regime. He has in front of him 4 years before he even goes to elections. And he has a very Syria in a very bad shape. He has to invest in rebuilding it, and he's adopted a relatively moderate language towards Israel. So together with the Turks, we can work out under American auspices. This was not something that was mentioned yesterday in the press conference, but I think that together with the Turks under American auspices, we can work out some understandings regarding Syria that would make sure that our common interests of Turkey, Israel, United States, and Shara are met. First of all, Iran doesn't come back. Secondly, Syria is not being used in order to deliver arms to Hezbollah. Thirdly, no terror presence along the border with Israel. And fourthly, no big army built in Syria. He doesn't need an army. There's no threat that justifies the building of a big army. And if we can work out these issues and also take care of the rights of the minorities, the Druze and the Kurds, to some extent, this is something that we have to work out with the Turks, then we can promote some understandings that will prevail in Syria for a longer period. That said, we have to remember this guy is coming from ISIS and Al-Qaeda. He's not a friend of Israel. That's friendship is not expected. But some understandings can be worked out.
Jeffrey, it's important for me to point out something important. President Trump said that United States of America first. The process in the Middle East is that I believe the same feeling, the same policy is Assisi's policy by saying Egypt, Misr awalan, Egypt first. The same is the feeling in Syria. I believe the new president in Lebanon believes that what is important to make strong his leadership and his legacy in Lebanon. And of course, we can see this also in Saudi Arabia. The feeling is, after the decision being made by 10, 15 years ago that US is leaving the Middle East. So you are back here. United States of America must be back here. But the feeling here is very important to have United States be involved again in the Middle East, but we have to say the same. To understand the process in the Middle East, that the leaders believe they have responsibility first for their own nations.
So if I could jump in, I couldn't agree with General Farkas and General Kupawasa. Both are exactly spot on. I couldn't agree more, but I want to add the following. So what does it mean for us to work with them? And what are the conditions? So let me start with the conditions. Yossi laid them out, that they have to renounce terrorism, they can't have weapons smuggling, in Syria and Lebanon. They can't allow Hezbollah to regroup. In Syria, you have to keep out, most importantly, the Iranians from Syria and Lebanon, because the Quds force, which may be open to debate or intelligence assessment, I've heard mixed. Some say the Quds force is no longer there. I've heard some reliable sources say the Quds force, while much smaller, is still there. The Quds force has to get out of Syria and Lebanon. But I think there is, and I think when you look at Lebanon, what's so encouraging is General Aoun. Mike Pompeo met with Aoun many times, and Mike Pompeo is a tough judge of character. He says, I trust him, I believe in him, he's a good guy. So we're in the best position we've ever been in. But what this requires, though, is a strategy. I know that you both say it's difficult, we can't predict. Well, leaders like David Ben-Gurion and people like that have visions. When people thought it's crazy to do certain things, all of Ben-Gurion's direct reports said, don't accept the UN resolution of Israel in an Arab country. Israel is so tiny, it's not a viable nation. He said, you know, people in life who go for all or nothing usually end up with nothing, something to that effect. We're in the same position. We're in a position now where we're in a better position. We're winning. We need to win. There's no substitute, or you're back at war again, and I will tell you it will be worse. And winning is defined as regime change in Iran. If you think sanctions would have influenced Nazi Germany in 1935 in the direction they're going, then we're delusional. Sanctions would have no more influenced Germany's behavior in 1935, just to use a hypothetical year as an example, as sanctions will influence Iran. That's the problem with a lot of policymakers. Now, sanctions may hurt Iran a lot, but if you examine the history of sanctions, it's very questionable whether they ever work. The United States put very severe sanctions on Russia 3 years ago. They're fighting even more effectively now than they did 3 years ago. Where you think the sanctions has worked? No, it hurt them, but Russia is on a war economy, and they very effectively have evaded the sanctions. Working with Iran, North Korea, Turkey, and other nations, they've been able to get around the sanctions. So at the end of the day, we have to be honest. We need regime change. And why we're in a great position and why we need great leadership is we have everything going our way. The Iranian people hate the regime. In 1935, I think most people probably liked the Nazi regime. It was more complicated. But today, the majority, who knows what the number is, but 80, 90% of the people in Iran hate the regime. When you look at Syria and Lebanon, look what Iranian colonialism and imperialism has brought them. Misery, unemployment, no electricity, destroyed their lives. Look at Yemen. We're on the right side in that we have to talk about, as you referred to it, General Farkash, we have to talk about the people. Work with the Lebanese people, help the Lebanese people. There's no lie or manipulation or exploitation here. Israel's not here to conquer or exploit. This is a great opportunity to people, unite with the Lebanese people and say, we all want our independence. We don't want any foreign forces in the region. Israel can say it about themselves. We just want to live in peace with our neighbor. Take the high ground. This is what's important. We can all give an analysis of what's happening today, and I know it's very helpful. But what's so much more important is we have a unique opportunity to possibly end all the hatred against Israel and finally have a meaningful level of peace in the region that will not only bring peace to Israel, which has not had peace in 100 years, even before Israel was established as a nation, and will uplift the lives of millions of Arabs that deserve a better life. We're on the same side of the majority of the Arab people. That's the beauty of this. But it requires leadership. It requires a long-term strategy. And only then will we have the goals of peace. We don't want to be back on a webinar in 5 years from now when once again we got complacent, Israel is so strong, and some other attack. It could be chemical, biological weapons. You know, we're always fighting the last war. That's what generals do. You don't know which way the Iranians, because they're extremely creative, they'll come back and attack Israel. We have to recognize the clarity of the facts that no nation in the world is committed to the destruction of their neighbor or of another nation. Only Israel. is a victim of that. No other nation in the world has to deal with that. That a nation like Iran, where we're separated by thousands of miles, we don't have a border dispute with them, an energy dispute with them. They want to utterly destroy another sovereign nation. We need to go on the offensive in public relations to say, this is wrong on every level, right? And go on the offensive so we stop this. And we need to liberate the Iranian people.
Okay. Gentlemen, I'd like to thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Igal, any last words?
I want to thank to everyone, to General Farkas, to General Cooperwasser, to Arlie for participating, and Jeff, to you and your team to making it happen. Thank you very much. And any question on the chat, there is the contact information to know more about us.
I'd like to thank the panelists. I'd like to thank you, the audience, for joining us for another program sponsored by AJU's Wizin Center for Open Learning. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we've sponsored over 200 programs with over 200,000 people that have registered for it. And we're also grateful for your support. Many of you have provided support for these programs, which are free, but of course have costs associated with them. We also hope that you'll visit the AJU webpage, www.aju.edu, often to see the many exciting programs we have in the future. So I'd like to thank our panelists who are really in Israel and across the United States for a fascinating discussion, not only on Syria and Lebanon, but on breaking developments with regard to President Trump's announcement on Gaza. And I'd like to thank you, the audience, and hope to see you again soon. Thanks so very much.